Hello, and welcome back to Pathfinder. My name is Philip, and I'm here to talk about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. This is part of a series I'm producing, covering the various deities in the Pathfinder role-playing game and its setting, the world of Golarion. Last time, I talked about Milani, the ascendant half-elf saint of Aroden, and the goddess of hope and rebellion. This time, I'm discussing the Living God Razmir, god of the nation of Razmiran, and the secret fifth mortal to pass the test of the Starstone. Before that, though, if you enjoy this video and want to hear more Pathfinder lore, consider subscribing or commenting below. With that out of the way, let's move on to the rundown. Razmir is often referred to as the Living God, or the Master of the 31 Steps. His church has a very narrow spread, geographically speaking, but has a very strong grip on the areas where it is prominent. He is well known around Lake Encarthen and in the River Kingdoms, but less so in the wider Inner Sea region. Razmir's main areas of concern are obedience and luxury, and unlike most gods, he takes direct interest in one nation on Golarion, in this case, the nation of Razmiran. Outside of his formal clergy, he is almost exclusively worshipped by the citizens of Razmiran, and a few citizens of its neighboring nations. Additionally, some scholars of magic who seek a more structured approach to faith than what Nethys can provide are instead drawn to the Razmiran Church as well. Razmir is very consistent in the way he presents himself to his followers. Having manifested as a physical form on Golarion, he is one of the vanishingly few gods who can be seen on the material plane by any follower to whom he grants an audience. He appears as a hooded figure draped in a dark cloak with deep red trim. Rich embroidery and gold inlay adorn his robes. He typically carries a staff in one hand, though he has also wielded a fine steel mace. His face is covered by an ivory mask, and no one has ever glimpsed the face beneath. Razmir's teachings claim that his divine face is too perfect to be seen by mortals, and the mask is worn to give his faithful something to gaze upon. Instead of claiming a deific realm in the outer sphere, Razmir has claimed the nation of Razmiran as his home. Situated in northern Avestan on the shores of Lake Encarthen, Razmiran is bordered to the north by Ustalav, to the south by Kyonin, and to the east by the River Kingdoms. As a nation with rich soil, Razmiran is an exporter of food and lumber to the rest of the Broken Lands region. The population of Razmiran is divided into two economic classes. The upper class consists of Razmir's elite priests and those nobles and merchants who have proven their loyalty to the regime. Everyone else, the vast majority of the population, lives in squalor, taxed heavily to support Razmir's church. Still, most of the citizens take comfort in Razmir's protection, and are confident that he can and will protect them from the many threats in the region. Devout followers of Razmir believe in a strict social hierarchy. The faith is highly structured, with specific ranks in the church to which priests can ascend by demonstrating their devotion and their effectiveness in enforcing Razmir's will. Razmir's priesthood is shockingly obedient to his edicts, even compared to other faiths in Avestan. Indoctrination into the priesthood is a formal exercise, involving the potential recruits traveling to the secret fortress of First Step. Here, followers are instructed in the first of Razmir's 31 steps, the teachings which he employed to pass the test of the Starstone. The indoctrination process is extremely dangerous and kills more than a few potential recruits every year. Once recruits emerge from the first step, they are officially clerics of Razmir and are prepared to receive divine power from their god. As a justification for the harshness of his recruitment process, and as an explanation for the fanaticism of his priests, Razmir has claimed that he is simply more discerning than most of his fellow deities, and his willingness to commune with his mortal followers grants him the ability to choose with incredible specificity who is worthy of serving him. Temples to Razmir can be found in every major settlement in Razmiran. They typically consist of relatively plain buildings with a large central worship chamber. These chambers contain a raised platform at the top of a series of steps, with a gold or silver mask at the top, representing Razmir's presence. The steps themselves are another representation of Razmir's 31 steps. The 31 steps are also commonly represented in the structure of worship services. These steps are further detailed in Razmir's holy text, though I have not yet been able to find any further information on the text itself. Additionally, the laws of the nation of Razmiran were partially written by Razmir himself, and so might themselves be considered something of a holy text. That said, Razmir has made sudden proclamations and revisions to his rules with increasing frequency in recent years, so finding an updated legal codex might prove difficult. As mentioned earlier, the faith of Razmir is highly centralized in the nation of Razmiran. Within the nation's borders, only belief in Razmir is allowed, and all other churches have been banned. Nearby nations also play host to small cults of Razmir. Nirmathas, Multhun, and Ustalav have all seen an influx of Razmiran priests in recent decades, and the faith is well known among the poor of these nations. Evangelists of Razmir have taken special care to focus their efforts on the poor and downtrodden of other nations, providing them with food and charity to show the prosperity which awaits those who see the light and join Razmir's faithful. Other nations in the region, namely Kyonin and Druma, and formerly Lastwall, have all banned the faith of Razmir, arresting any of his proselytizing followers on sight. The personal history of Razmir is somewhat vague prior to his arrival in the land which would become Razmiran. One of the most widely circulated tales of his past involves Razmir having grown up dirt poor on the streets of Opara, the capital of Taldor. Another popular myth describes the young Razmir as a simple farmhand in Varissia who discovered an ancient cache of Thessalonian magic. Other tales exist as well, most involving Razmir as a downtrodden child who attained wealth and power through his own incredible skill and hard work. Sometime before 4661 AR, Razmir attempted and passed the test of the Starstone in Absalom. Instead of emerging publicly to the world and declaring himself a god then and there, Razmir traveled north to the River Kingdoms. The details of Razmir's test are still kept vague, but Razmir has proclaimed that the only reason he'd been able to pass was his mastery of the 31 steps, the same steps he's in the process of teaching to his followers. In 4661 AR, Razmir appeared in the town of Zur in the Duchy of Melkat. He declared himself a living god and instructed the town's citizens to fall down in submission to him. Of course, this wasn't met with blind acceptance. Both the Magister of Zur and the Duke Melkat himself attempted to put a stop to Razmir's rise to power. Razmir responded first with offers of peace, declaring that these men might join his clergy and thus become wealthy and powerful. Each man refused, declaring Razmir a false god and ordering his arrest. Razmir responded in kind, first by turning the Magister into a fox, then by summoning a gout of flame to reduce Duke Melkat to a pile of ash. From here, Razmir's rise was assured. He took over the Duchy of Melkat, renaming it Razmiran, and established his formal church. He renamed the city of Thronestep, declaring it his capital, then set about ruling his new realm. Razmiran has expanded its borders multiple times since, generally by subsuming smaller river kingdoms and overwhelming their armies with hordes of loyal Razmiran priests, backed up by the magical might of their god. Since then, Razmir has occupied himself with the management of his kingdom and the formalization of his priesthood. He generally delegates the day-to-day affairs of state to his chief lieutenants, those priests designated as having taken the 15th step. Anyone who questions this method might look back to the hands-off approach Aroden took with Absalom. He also has taken an interest in the recent return of the Whispering Tyrant, going so far as to propose an alliance between the two of them. Razmir maintains relatively few relationships with his fellow deities, and has declared the worship of all gods besides himself to be illegal in Razmiran. He seems to consider Sivana, the goddess of illusions and trickery, to be something of a personal inspiration, though the reason for this is unknown. Sivana, for her part, seems to reciprocate this interest, and has sent her agents to Razmir in the form of witches from Irisin on multiple occasions. With the exception of Sivana, none of the other gods have taken a substantial interest in Razmir or his nation. In fact, most of the deities seem to consider him entirely beneath their notice. Even the other Starstone Ascendant have yet to acknowledge him in any meaningful way. Okay, so this is the part of the video where I explain what's actually going on. Everything I've told you so far is believed to be true in universe. But all of it, every single thing, is all built on the back of one truly exceptional lie. Razmir is not a god. And I don't mean he isn't a true deity, but is instead a demigod. No, Razmir isn't divine in any way. He has no spark of divinity. He cannot grant divine spells or abilities to his followers. Razmir is a man, a mortal man who hides behind a mask and has tricked an entire nation into believing he is a god. So, how did he do this? Razmir is, in fact, a wizard, and an exceptionally powerful wizard at that. His command over arcane magic is so impressive that, in the remote corner of Golarion that is the River Kingdoms, he has managed to convince thousands of people that his powers are divine in nature. But it's all a sham. Every miracle he has ever performed is just a subtly applied spell combined with some clever misdirection. This all goes a long way in answering some of the questions and contradictions about his kingdom and his history. Why can no one agree on a single version of his past? Because there are probably still people alive who would have known him as a youth, and if he had told the truth about his past, they could call him out on his bullshit. Why didn't he reveal himself in Absalom? Because there were enough powerful wizards there to recognize his magic for what it was. In Absalom, the entire population would have doubted him. In the backwater of the River Kingdoms, no one knows any better. Why does Sivana like Razmir while all the other gods treat him with derision if they acknowledge him at all? Because Sivana is a goddess of illusions and secrets, and Razmir has produced possibly the biggest illusion in all of Golarion. And the other gods hate him because he is, quite literally, a pretender to their thrones. And why does Razmir need an alliance with the Whispering Tyrant? Because Tar-Baphon would wipe the floor with him if they ever came to blows. Remember, Tar-Baphon once picked a fight with an actual living god and survived. Razmir would stand no chance. Of course, Razmir is no slouch in terms of power. Even though he isn't actually a god, what he's accomplished is truly impressive. In terms of pure numbers, Razmir is a 19th level wizard, making him one of the most mechanically powerful NPCs on Golarion. He is also fabulously wealthy, having extracted the wealth of the citizens of Razmiran for over 50 years now. All of this to say that, while he could most certainly be defeated by a dedicated group of adventurers, he wouldn't be the pushover they might initially assume if they learn his secret. Even more than his personal power, Razmir has amassed the loyal following of his formal clergy. The Razmiran priests are fanatically loyal, each one having gone through the grueling initiation process at the First Step Fortress. This process is far more dangerous and involved than anyone in Razmiran fully understands, and conditions the minds of the priests such that they are instilled with something akin to a new persona. And while I'm on the topic of clergy, since Razmir is not in any way divine, he cannot grant his followers access to divine spells. This means that any followers who cast spells in his name must be drawing on some other source of power. Now, back in First Edition, this was actually a lot more difficult to accomplish. Back then, there were only divine and arcane spells, since occult and primal weren't defined in the lore yet. This might seem like a small distinction, but the arcane spell list had and continues to have a notable lack of healing spells, one of the things for which clerics are known. Since the majority of his followers were arcane spellcasters, they had to deal with this obvious gap in their abilities. Razmir and his followers got, and continue to get, around this problem using a series of clever tricks. The most obvious and frequent of these is the use of traditional medicinal practices, herbalism, alchemy, and magic items. Priests of Razmir are carefully trained in the art of deception, and take great care to disguise their spellcasting. To clarify, not everything Razmir and his priests were doing was a cheap trick. One of the most impressive feats of magic which Razmir accomplished was the ability to grant his followers the power of a cleric's domain. How he accomplished this is unknown, though I wouldn't be surprised if he had discovered some artifact or ritual which allowed him to perform this admittedly impressive feat. On top of this, Razmir has discovered a method by which he could provide his clerics with a lesser version of the Channel Energy Cleric class feature, the former version of the modern 2e Cleric's Divine Font feature. He has also allowed arcane casters to add several Cure Wounds spells, the old version of the modern heal spell, to their arcane spell lists. Granted, these pseudo-divine spells and abilities only grant temporary hit points, but it's still impressive. Getting back to the broader lore, Razmir's true status as a mortal also explains some of his recent activities. Razmir has been desperately seeking a dose of the Sun Orchid Elixir, the legendary alchemical brew which restores the youth of the imbiber. Supposedly, Razmir placed a winning bid on one of the recently auctioned vials of the elixir, but it was unfairly stolen from him. This information, however, is claimed only by Razmir himself, so the truth of the matter is uncertain at best. Additionally, Blood Mistress Jacqueline of the Red Mantis Assassins has recently published that some unnamed person in Razmiran has recently attempted to hire her to assassinate Tar-Baphon, the Whispering Tyrant. Razmir has never owned up to having done this, but it certainly wouldn't be outside of his general MO. So now that I've revealed Razmir's little secret, let's move on to player information. For those using the alignment rules, Razmir is lawful evil. His edicts, such that I could find them, are to gather wealth and power, to enjoy a life of well-earned luxury, and to spread the faith of Razmir. Conversely, to become and remain poor, to besmirch Razmir's good name, or to spread heresy are all anathema to Razmir. Additionally, the laws of the nation of Razmiran might be considered edicts. His holy symbol is a mask, and specifically his own mask, made from ivory, with silver or gray inlaid diamond patterns around the eyes. While he doesn't technically have domains, Razmir has been able to replicate the powers of specific domains. Back in 1e, these domains were law, evil, charm, and trickery. In 2e, the equivalent domains are probably secrecy, trickery, tyranny, and wealth, though please note that these haven't been designated by Paizo. I'm making my best guesses. Razmir doesn't have any listed sacred colors that I could find. That said, the flag of Razmiran is made up of two colors, gold and yellow, and a purplish burgundy color. Razmir's priests, however, do not typically dress in these colors. They instead typically dress in long, flowing robes, not dissimilar to Razmir's own. They pair these robes with full-face masks, stylized after their god's holy symbol. The combination of mask material and robe color is used to delineate rank among the priests. For example, the Visions, Razmir's top lieutenants, who are referred to as having taken the 15th step, wear masks made from gold. By contrast, their subordinates, those who have taken the 12th step, wear masks made from silver. Razmir has no listed favored weapon that I could find. However, nearly all depictions of his priests show them wielding maces or other weapons in the club group. Followers of a higher rank might emphasize their status by wielding elaborately decorated weapons. Given that Razmir can't magically grant weapon proficiency by being a divinity, and given that most of his followers have historically been arcane spellcasters, simple weapons are likely most common among his followers. Similar to his weapons and colors, Razmir has no listed favored animal, and I have found no depictions of Razmiran priests with animal companions or familiars. Followers who do make use of such creatures likely choose from the animals common to the River Kingdom's region. Class-wise, followers of Razmir are pretty complex, especially compared to followers of conventional deities. Obviously, clerics of Razmir don't exist, and any character claiming to be one is lying. With the proliferation of divine spellcasters in 2e, relative to their existence in 1e, this ruse might actually be easier to pull off than ever before. True divine spellcasters, who pose as clerics, might include divine sorcerers, divine witches, or oracles. Since the occult spell list also has some healing magic, the bard or psychic might also be able to accomplish this deception as well. Of course, characters with an emphasis on charisma, and who have trained in the deception skill, will be more effective at convincing onlookers of their divine mandate. Arcane casters, which were the most common followers of Razmir back in 1e, are where things get tricky. These characters would likely need to take feats from archetypes like the medic, the herbalist, or the scroll trickster in order to accomplish any healing they perform. They might also put emphasis on alchemical crafting in order to brew potions to further sell their deception. Of course, back in 1e, characters might have taken levels in the False Priest Prestige class. Since this hasn't been officially updated to 2e yet, I've taken a stab at creating an archetype on my own. Check it out in the description below if you're interested. Since they wear masks in public, the ancestries and heritages of the Razmiran priests are largely unknown. Since most of the followers are typically drawn from the local population, however, they can probably be assumed to be consistent with the ancestral makeup of the region, meaning mostly humans with a smattering of elves, halflings, and dwarves. I haven't seen any depictions of Razmiran priests which aren't of medium size and roughly human build, but that doesn't mean that non-human followers don't exist. Given that Razmir's church places special emphasis on recruitment, I don't see any reason why they would turn away a potential follower based on ancestry. Followers of Razmir are liars first and foremost, charlatans and tricksters all. They seek their fortunes at the expense of the citizens of Razmiran, and enforce their worldview at the point of a sword when necessary. The extent to which any individual priest believes in his god is sort of up for debate, but most of them went through the conditioning at the First Step Fortress, so their loyalty is generally unquestioned. They are typically skilled at deception, so they might better maintain their ruse, and often have expertise in arcana and general spellcraft, alongside more diplomatic skills. They are unafraid to resort to violence when confronted, and act as much like a street gang as like a church. For GMs looking to incorporate Razmir and his followers into a campaign, here are some ideas. Since Razmir isn't a real deity, he doesn't have a herald or a race of divine servitors. Instead, Razmir's clergy act as his servitors, enforcing his will and gathering the tithes he requires of his citizens. They act as inquisitors, seeking out disloyalty and faithlessness among the citizenry of Razmiran. Among these servants, Vilnaria Tin, the Red Coin, is considered exceptionally dangerous. She is one of the very few followers who might be easily recognized, as her mask has been cracked, leaving part of her scarred face visible. Razmir and his followers are most commonly found in and around Razmiran, so campaigns and adventures involving them will likely take place here. A revolutionary-themed campaign involving the overthrow of Razmir and his regime might be fun, especially if the idea of larger revolutions in Isgir or Cheliax seem a bit intimidating to run. Also, Razmir himself would make for a very cool final boss, especially with all the traps and tricks he has likely set up to make himself seem more godly. PCs in such a campaign might be able to ally themselves with the former Duke Melcat, who still exists in Razmiran as a ghost, wandering around looking for anyone willing to help him tear down the false god. Another campaign or adventure might involve an attempted expansion by the armies of Razmiran. Razmir has expanded his empire several times over its history, typically by absorbing small river kingdoms who can be easily bullied. The Living God has taken to the field during these conquests, supporting his followers with his powerful arcane spells. This situation might present a cool backdrop for a campaign, with the PCs taking on the roles of citizens of a neighboring river kingdom, which Razmir has decided to conquer. PCs could go from fleeing the oncoming enemy, to forming a resistance, to organizing a counterattack, to even confronting Razmir himself in the field. Finally, Razmir's increasing interest in the Sun Orchid elixir presents a great opportunity for a GM to send his followers out to other corners of the world. For a GM running a campaign in Thuvia, a group of Razmiran priests could be fantastic side quest villains. Razmir likely doesn't have the resources to send a small army of priests to serve as villains for an entire campaign, but a dozen or so followers with enough funding to hire mercenaries could make for a great distraction adventure from a larger storyline. This also applies to anywhere a vial of the Sun Orchid elixir has been purchased. If a vial has been sold to a wealthy buyer in Cheliax, Kadira, or even far-off New Thassalon, Razmir might send his followers out in an attempt to collect it. So that's it. That's Razmir, the living god of Razmiran, and the false god at the head of a cult of fanatical priests. Razmir is one of the funnier NPCs that Paizo has created, and he does a great job of making Golarion feel even more interesting. He is also a reminder to the players about their own potential. Razmir is a level 19 wizard, and he has successfully convinced an entire nation that he's a deity. If he can do that, what can the players accomplish? Next time, I want to kick off my first ever themed month here at Pathfinder. The non-human ancestries rarely get the attention they deserve, and I want to rectify that. So, July 2024 is hereby declared Elf Month. Up first is Findalad Lara, the elven goddess of architecture and artistic preservation. See you next time.